Good morning. This is the time and place for the August 24th board hearing. Getting a little bit of feedback, but we'll go ahead anyway. It looks like we have a full quorum. All members are here, and we will go ahead and kick this off. I'll turn the time over to Director Baza for the briefing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to you and members of the board for your August meeting here in Salt Lake City at the DNR building. I'm John Baza. I'm the Director of the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining. We have one main item on our briefing this morning, and to provide you with this information, and the background on it is a few weeks ago we had a meeting with a company that's interested in doing work out in the Uintah Basin, extracting product from oil sands. And so in that meeting, I had asked their attorney if it would be helpful to have kind of a fundamental instruction to the board about what heavy oil operations are and how it's going to be applied here in Utah. So to do that, their attorney is Ms. Denise Dragoo. I think many of you know her. She has been a practitioner in the oil, gas, and mining space for quite a long time. And I will allow Denise to come forward and introduce the members of her team.
Okay, good. Well, thank you, Director Baza. That was a great introduction. I'm Denise Dragoo with the law firm of Snell and Wilmer, and today we're going to present an introduction to heavy oil operations. And these operations are being proposed by two companies. They actually are forming a joint venture called Greenfield Energy, but it's the two companies are Valcor and Valcor's subsidiary Heavy Sweet Oil LLC, and Tomco and Tomco's subsidiary AC Oil LLC. And today we have the members of Valcor who are here to make the presentation. Brian McGregor will present. He's the operations drilling manager for Valcor, and Stephen Bly is the manager of the company. So I'll just turn it over to Brian and let him make the introduction to heavy oil.
Thank you, Denise. I'll just jump right into it. But as Denise indicated, we're looking at doing a project in the Uintah Basin for some heavy oil operations. So the presentation, I'm going to just touch on what the heavy oil operations that are available to us exist, and then I'll just briefly touch into what our plans are as a company, or we'll be representing both companies, Heavy Sweet and Tomco. Globally, this chart here shows the distribution of the resources of oil. And as you can see by it, only 30% of conventional is under conventional oil. The rest of it is under heavy oil or extra heavy or oil sands and bitumen, which is all in the heavy oil range. So 70% of the resources that are available are actually in heavy oil. So it is a huge potential upside. In the Uintah Basin, Utah actually holds about 30 billion barrels of heavy oil resources in reserves, and it's positioned to be the largest commercial producer in the United States. There hasn't been any real significant development now, but the potential is there. So we see it as a huge resource. So what is heavy oil? Like, how is it different than what your normal oil is? And oil is classified under what's called crude gravity, which is an API number, and it's actually kind of the inverse of density. So the higher the API number, the lighter the oil. So your conventional oils will be quite high in the 40 to 50 range. Heavy oil is below 22 API, and extra heavy oil is actually below 10 API. Water is an arbitrary number, but it's actually given a 10 API number. So anything that's heavy crude or the extra heavy will actually float or sink in water. The oil that we're looking at Uintah is about 12 API. It's also characterized by viscosity, and that's probably more important than the density. And viscosity is how thick it is, how easy it'll flow. And it's measured by centipoise. So viscosity will range between 100 to 100,000 centipoise. And for reference, honey, which is your table honey, that's 10,000 centipoise. So we're looking at thicker stuff like that. Typically, these reservoirs don't have pressure, and it can exist as surface deposits or in situ meaning that it's below surface and it's in formation. And the common extraction methods, there's a lot more, but these are the 6 primary ones that we're looking at. One, and I'm going to go into more detail, so I won't explain them a lot on this slide. One is surface extraction, which is mining. There's the natural production systems, and that's where the oil has enough viscosity that it will flow with artificial lift. And then the next is the cold heavy oil production. So it will still flow, but this is laden with sand. So sand creates its own issue. The next 3 methods are EOR extraction methods, or enhanced oil recovery methods. First, the cyclic steam stimulation with the acronym CSS, and that's commonly referred to as huff and puff. There's the reservoir admissible flood systems, where you're injecting fluid into the reservoir. And the last one, which is kind of a variation of the flood system, is steam assisted gravity drainage, SAGD. And that's a common term. The operations in Canada are SAGD. Actually, that's where I'm from, is Canada. So let's jump into surface extraction, and that's where the deposits are at surface. It's an open pit mine like any normal mining operations. The material is collected, it's crushed, diluted, separated, and it's divided into its own individual components: sand, clay, bitumen or oil, heavy oil, and then free water. The bitumen is collected from this process, it's refined, and then it's sent to market. And that's currently what is happening at Asphalt Ridge at Uintah. The next production system is natural production, or cold heavy oil production. And this is where it'll flow on its own. The heavy deposits, they're below surface, so it has to be extracted. The viscosities are low enough that it will flow under your normal production system, some sort of artificial lift, pump jacks, PCPs, etc. And these wells, stimulation or fracturing is not normally an option. I mean, you can do it, but there's no benefit to it. The permeability and the porosity is high enough that the fracturing really doesn't net any benefit. The optimization on these type of reservoirs is by reservoir exposure, and that's through horizontal wells, multilateral horizontal wells, or as in this diagram here is fishbone type wells, where you'll drill a number of bones off the central spine. The next system is heavy oil production with sand. So it's the same type of oil, it'll flow on its own, but these formations are quite unconsolidated. So as you're producing them, you'll actually produce sand. And it's beneficial producing the sand, you'll get more reservoir exposure, but the sand has its issues. The biggest issue is that it'll clog up your pumps. Another issue is that they'll form sand bridges. If you have a horizontal well, they'll form a bridge, they'll shut off production and will impede the flow. We don't really see sand in our reservoir that'll be unconsolidated. So it's not really a big issue for us right now. But if we do encounter formations that do have they're unconsolidated, we will be able to use some of the techniques. The next system is part of the enhanced oil recovery, and it's called the cyclic steam stimulation, or huff and puff. So in these wells, there's cycles. So you'll actually inject steam and or gas. So it's injected into the reservoir to heat it up, to energize it. And the heating of the reservoir will reduce the viscosity. The gas combining with the residual oil will also reduce the viscosity. So after it's been heated up and charged up, then we'll put it back on production, which is the puff part. The huff part is charging it up. Puffing is blowing it down. So it's produced back, recovering the oil and the water, or the steam and the condensed water. And the gas in the formation will expand, and that'll maintain pressure support as you're producing it back. This is standard normal industry practice, and the only issue that normal practice has is that we use special cement blends because there's a heating process, and we use expansion joints in the casing because the casing will expand with heat. To the next phase after this is where you'll go into reservoir and or miscible flood. And miscible flood, miscible is when you're injecting a gas. So that's what miscible flood is. And the gas can be anything like nitrogen, oxygen, natural gas, CO2, any form of gas that energizes and actually forms bonds with the reservoir fluid. So the injection wells and producing wells, the injection wells will provide the pressure support, and this will drive the oil to the producing wells. The steam, again, will heat the reservoir fluid to reduce the viscosity. The miscible flood will inject the gases, and that will combine with the residual reservoir fluid and maintain the pressure support. And again, since this is a heating process, we need to accommodate for that with a special cement blend. And then finally, the horizontal or SAG-D type wells. And if I say horizontal wells or I say SAG-D, they're interchangeable. But it's the same type of thing where you have an injection well and a producing well. And these are drilled in pairs. So you'll drill the first well in the higher part of the reservoir, and that is your injection well. The lower well is your producing well, and it'll be drilled second. And the directional systems will actually pair or correlate with the upper well. So you want to parallel the first well with the second well, or the second well with the first well. It's a bit more expensive, obviously, but it's ideal for thinner type reservoirs. And it's also a good application in areas where there's surface restrictions, where you're in hills and valleys, you want to minimize your surface impact. So now, with that as your background, as your heavy oil 101 type of thing, I'll just briefly talk about our opportunity that we're looking at. Right now, we do have the surface extraction, but we do have sort of three phases of our project. Phase 1 and phase 2 are a pilot project. So in phase 1, we're going to drill 4 central wells in our field. And these ones will still require the UIC approval because they will be injection. But these will use the huff and puff or CSS method, but it doesn't require any special spacing. It'll still be your normal standard 40-acre spacing. But when we get into phase 2, then we'll need a bit more approvals, and there's going to be 6 offset wells drilled around each central injection well. The central wells will be converted to an injection well, and the 6 offset wells will be producing wells. And if you look at it in a diagram, it actually forms like a honeycomb. So it's a continuous pattern that can be continued ad infinitum. It's called a 7-spot hexagonal flood scheme. Now, we'll require UIC approval. It'll require a downspacing application, and will require board approval. The downspacing here, the spacing of the wells will be 370 feet, which is also 2.5-acre spacing. But we feel that the zone is thick enough that vertical well pattern will effectively and economically recover the reserves. I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the down spacing because this is part of our ask today or upcoming. The down spacing optimizes using enhanced recovery techniques. And it's nice to have a flexible spacing arrangement that facilitates optimization. We want to we'll probably have to do some adjusting on the fly as we're developing this field based on well results. In Utah, the standard spacing for a conventional oil is 40-acre spacing, and it's also has 920 feet between well centers. You know, that if you do the math, it's 920 feet is, you know, as the eagle flies. But you know, they can actually be even further apart, but 920 is the closest under current regulations. And then the normal spacing for a horizontal well is one well per 640 acres. And you can already see that with SAGD, you'd need 2 wells at least. Our heavy oil project that we're proposing is optimized on 2.5 acre spacing and 370 feet between well centers. So these are the requirements in summary of our of what we'll need to do for our phases 1 and phases 2. So for phase 1, we'll need the APD applications for the first 4 wells, and we're putting that together right now. We'll also need the UIC class 2 well applications for phase 1. When we go to phase 2, we're going to need the downspacing approval for the down 24 wells. We're going to do the 24 APD applications, and then we'll need the UIC class 2 well applications for phase 2. Now, the one option exists that we might just want to permit all phase 1 and phase 2 as one UIC application. And then phase 3, after the results of phase 2, will be when we go to complete field development with the 7-spot injection producer scheme that will blanket the field. Again, we want to optimize. So some of these pads, when we get deeper in the formation, we'll try to do it from 1 pad rather than 7 pads. And it'll depend on math, what kind of terminal angle we get. So the deeper the wells you have, the shallower your angle will be. So they'll be more conducive to using 1 pad to drill all 7 wells. We also want to have the option to do with SAGD wells, because there are some areas that SAGD might be the only option to drill some horizontal wells. But of course, we won't do these. We will need the approvals from the DOGM and also the board for the spacing and permitting, et cetera. So in summary, it is a unique opportunity. Heavy oil has a significant resource potential in Utah. And with proper planning, there's a variety of EOR applications that we'll be using to improve the recovery of this resource. It'll require proper planning, proper engineering, teamwork, et cetera. But it's all normal industry practices. It's nothing new, nothing experimental. It's all been established industry practices. But the important thing the thing that we really want to do before we even get started is have flexibility in our operation that we can change as conditions change. So that's pretty much all I have to say. It's if you have any questions, can answer it now, or can answer it later myself or Steve or Denise or however.
Well, we appreciate the presentation. I'm sure we have plenty of questions. We really can't ask or get specific about this matter until it's formally before us, but I'm sure we've got a lot of questions. Board members?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Alan.
No, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. On your phase 1, what's your injection fluid going to be? You may have said it, but
we're gonna start with steam.
Steam, okay.
But there'll also be a component of CO2 in there as well. So you know, the CO2, it actually of all your gases, CO2 is actually the best gas for combining with oil reserves.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
Go ahead, Rich.
2 questions. So if you're injecting CO2, have you done an analysis of the reservoir and containment of CO2? Is this you know, I know it's done for operational purposes, but is this also a way to sequester some CO2?
Well, Steve could probably answer that.
Okay. At this time, we're not directing it that way. We're just doing research on it. In general, when you do CO2 flood like this, about 2/3 tends to stay down the whole by doing nothing. It is our intention in the long term to use this to look at doing that. But we currently, the regulations in Utah, I think they default to the EPA and all of that. So it's a R&D effort for our side at the moment. But there is some incidental CO2 that stays down.
Thank you. One other question, the second question, what is the energy balance when you're heating the reservoir to get to improve the viscosity of the oil? How much energy are you putting in compared to what you're getting out? Is it 10 times more energy out for what you put in? That's just kind of a rough number.
I have roughly on BTU value, it's about 150 to 1. On economics wise, we put about $12 worth of fuel is used to put in the heat per barrel that comes back. That is our based upon all the studies we've done so far and simulations. That's about how much. So price-wise, that's because natural gas is high right now. But in actual BTUs back, it is about 150 to 1.
Thank you.
Mr. Church?
Is there any paraffin associated with these like there is the deeper oil in the basin? Is it paraffin-free crude?
It's basically paraffin-free. It's the unique resource that there is here. That the large opportunity we saw is that no one's doing anything with it, but it's a virtually zero sulfur heavy oil, which is extremely rare in the world. I know of no other place in the United States and only a few places in the entire world that have that. It also is low paraffin as far as bitumen goes. And one of the opportunities we have going forward is while we've been doing all of our geology for the past 2.5, 3 years here, we've also looked at unusual paths to market for this, because the heavy oil should be worth more than WTI, heavy sweet, because it's a rare resource. All of the main places that you get it in the world are gone. Venezuela started producing a little bit again, but they were off. Trinidad's 75% off their original height. And this is, like I said, the biggest resource for the U.S. for heavy oil. And it can be used for a larger number of things than light sweet crude can. For one is, we already have offtakes for asphalt. There's an extreme shortage of asphalt right now. If we take this and do some post-processing on site, we can take the diesel fraction. So we would have about 10 to 20% diesel. And the balance would be an extremely heavy, like you're saying, API is 6.5. Basically, they call it an asphalt concrete. It's a binder for asphalt. All you need to add is some gravel and usually some fine material. And that's one way to market. And so we avoid, because there's a limited amount of refining capacity for heavy oil in the state. We've went to all the majors already here, all the refineries, and they have maybe a 5,000 barrel a day capacity for cracking heavy oil like this. We've also conducting a trial next year with Marine Services Corporation, MSC. It's a big container shipping company. And if we take the heavy oil, the heaviest part of it is even the best. It can be mixed with a glycerin product. It's a byproduct of biodiesel, bioglycerin, and a little bit of water. And if you take those and emulsify them, it comes out looking about like a number 2 diesel, so like a heating oil. And it is based upon the international regulations. That product has about a 30% offset, carbon offset, compared to conventional oil, based on the full life cycle we've looked at, because we're not refining. The glycerin adds about 15% to the BTU value, and it's a zero carbon one, theoretically. So we have an 170,000 barrel trial scheduled for the next year in 2023 on that. And if that goes well, it competes favorably in the international market as biodiesel, even though it's a diesel product, because it goes by CO2 offset, not by source. And it would be more than 30%. We believe we've demonstrated it on paper already. And in the long term, we think we can show a higher amount, and it would qualify as biodiesel, which all the international shipping companies are required to use 15% of that, currently selling for $300 a barrel. And it would be a direct replacement for that.
Thank you.
Ms. Carson?
How deep are these deposits? Roughly.
The deepest we found so far is about 2,700 feet. So it varies between all the way to the surface, and below, say, 3,000 feet, we don't tend to not find it so far. We've done a pretty extensive work. We think we'll also be able to increase the overall estimate for the state. We've turned everything over already to SITLA that we did. We did a 9-month study with Utah Geological Survey, where we took core samples from everybody we could get, all the well data we could get from everywhere, and we combined it with some other few exploration wells we did in order to get cores from we already have the Uintah and the rim rock. We went down to the asphalt ridge, one that had never been cored for some reason, and that has never been included in any estimate, and it's about 50 to 75 feet thick across a pretty decent swath of the area. We then went out and did a 3D, 100,000 acres of 3D survey for the thing to do it as well. So we have a much better defined area across all of Asphalt Ridge and the northern part of PR Springs so far. And we're going to start a second campaign, we think, next year for about another 100,000 acres. And we think just on SITLA land, we'll be able to show 20 something billion barrels of oil sands in place.
Any other questions? I have a very simple question. How do you transport the product? So you pull off the diesel fraction. How do you then transport that material?
It requires it to be heated to about 160 degrees, which we would be doing already. To get the diesel off, we have to go to about 425 to 450. So it would already be that temperature, and then we would put it in insulated tanks, and then when they came to pick it up, they would put it in insulated trucks. And we have been shipping already with, as he mentioned, we have ongoing surface production right now. Not a huge amount. We'll be ramping up next year on that as well. But they've been sending that to Nevada without any trouble, and only having like a 5 to 10 degree temperature loss. So we think we can make it in just insulated cars. We could make it all the way to the South Coast or the West Coast with the current transportation infrastructure, and even better, with the extension of the rail.
Thank you. Well, we'll turn it back over to you guys. I think we've asked all our questions.
Great. We just wanted to thank you, Chairman Hansen, for entertaining us today, and we'll be back. Thank you.
Well, we'll look forward to it. Sounds interesting.
I might mention too that if you recall, there was some statutory language change that allowed this process, because they're using well drilling and standard well injection technology. It now falls within our oil and gas program because of that statutory definition. You've got a formal matter coming up later on today that is going to initiate the rulemaking process for that. So just bring that up. Thank you. Thank you. Very good. Appreciate the presentation. I'll move on. We don't have any other briefing items specifically for you, but I would mention to you that if you've been watching the news, you'll know that just in the last few days, I issued an order based on an informal hearing we had on the Parley's Canyon mine, which is, the operator of that is Granite on behalf of Tree Farm LLC. And I would thank Elizabeth Harris, Liz, our attorney, for being my counsel on that. And it required some real deep thought and some consideration in terms of how to navigate through the legal issues on that. But I think we ended up in the right place. The order gives the company a notice to proceed with small mining operations, subject to some conditions that they have to meet prior to actually commencing those operations. So the website will have that order very soon. I signed it on Tuesday, and we'll be just dealing with future issues as they come up. That's this point. The other thing that you'll probably hear about is the division also published a tentative approval of Point of the Mountain expansion for Geneva Rock. And that will likely be controversy as well, but it is in a public comment period at this point, which extends into September. So it's a couple of big items that have shown up on the news recently. Coming up in terms of our calendar items, I think I've sent you information about the Uintah Basin Energy Summit that is happening on the 30th and the 31st of August out in Vernal. And I know several board members have indicated they want to attend that. Because of the registration process, those board members will have to conduct their own registration, and then the division will reimburse you for that cost. So, but we do have travel arrangements already made for those board members who will be accompanying us as we drive out on Monday. Mr. Chairman, I think that's all I have in terms of division briefing. I'm happy to entertain any questions or topics that the board wants to address at this time.
Well, I'd like to thank you for arranging the attendance of the board members at the Uintah Basin meeting. I'm not sure I want to thank you for the Draper and the tree farm issue, but
Oh, please do.
I assume the Point of the Mountain expansion, they're drilling and blasting. It's not just mining gravel.
Yeah, that it definitely falls under our mining
right.
definition. So, and in fact, it is an expansion to an existing permit. So they've actually been under our regulatory control for quite a while now.
Yeah. Okay. Board members, you have any questions you have for Director Buzz? Well, see none. Thank you for the briefing.
And I'll turn the time back to you, Mr. Chairman, if there's any public participation you want to offer.
Well, that's a good point. Since that's the end of the briefing session, if there's anybody from the public that is interested in making a comment about something that is within our purview, this is the time and place to do so. You haven't heard anything, Julie, have you? Okay, I think we're home free. We will reconvene at 10 o'clock to start the hearing portion of today's meeting. So we'll go off the record and come back at 10. Thank you.